Your full name is Jack of Faces, and I have been just delighting in luxuriating is the word, luxuriating in your posts on your thread on X. It's quite extraordinary. It is something that I could and will spend hours doing. And do you know something else that's a real compliment about your thread? It's the kind of thread that on a bad day, when the world feels like it's pressing in on me because I've been online and I'm seeing the dark side of humanity too much and I'm out of balance, I normally stop and shut my computer and go out to nature. But I would flick over and have a look at your page, Jack. Welcome, welcome.
Wow. What an intro. Thank you so much, Liz. Again, like I told you, for having me. And that's a very big compliment. It's very humbling for me. And to hear that, it does something to me because I made that page because I struggle with the very same thing that you now described, right? I struggle with the dark side of the world. And I'm someone who's quite, I would say rather temperamental and quite opinionated. And I struggle with judgment, or at least I used to, where I would see the world and I would sort of like, I don't know, in a wrathful way, almost like judge it all the time. And I would say, there's so much darkness in the world, and sort of like I have to find my way of surviving that darkness, right? But then, for me at least, something clicked, right? And when that something clicked, I realized that there's meaning and function behind all of this stuff. So everything that's going on, and I wanted to create a space, and probably it's difficult nowadays to create a space where you can be very demanding and strict, and have that masculine effect and have that strong masculine voice that I believe people nowadays need, especially in the West, and also have, because this is what I lacked, and also have that gentleness and sort of like softer touch and kindness, which I think is something that's completely missing from the equation, right? So for you to tell me that, that gives me sort of like an external validation that I have at least partially succeeded in, well, creating a sort of, or nurturing the sort of space, and vision, that I set out to do. So that means a lot to me. It means a lot more to me than you think. So thank you for that immensely.
It's really an honor to talk to you. I was preparing for a program on transhumanism and AI, and it was getting into a very dark place, and maybe we will address that. But what I found in your philosophy, because it really is a page of enigmatic philosophizing, and what I mean by that is there's nothing hectoring about it. There is not that judgmental feeling. There's not that feeling of I know it all and my way is the only way and you need my wisdom, and if you don't agree with me, you'll be wrong and inadequate. There is that beautiful idea, which we really should have at every university, that Socratic method in a way. You don't so much necessarily ask questions, but what you'll do is you'll put sometimes longer posts, but sometimes a very short, enigmatic statement that really makes you think. There was one on transgenderism, for example, that wasn't judgmental at all. But can you remember what you wrote there? I think I can bring it back. Yeah, talk about
sure.
that.
I wrote that recently. I wrote that transgenderism is sort of representative, sort of like an example of how a hive mind would think about itself.
And what was beautiful, you left it at that.
Yeah.
You allowed me to sit back and go, of course, now what does that mean? But at the same time, there's a really deep truth there, and I don't quite understand it. And I will think about it, but I don't feel dumb. I don't feel like I'm on the outside and he's trying to be clever. I felt like you were saying, come on in, just sit with this.
I want you to know what you think about it. I genuinely do. I want you to think, well, how you interpret it, what imagery it put inside your mind and your imagination. Because I see myself as someone who can, well, take something that, let's say I've been shown, let's say through mystical means, but it doesn't have to be, and then interpret that for you in a way and sort of like put the full weight of that inside like compartmentalize that into a sentence and then show you that sentence and then allow you to unfold that same imagery. So I'm very curious because you're someone, from what I've seen, you're someone who is a very deep thinker. And also, if we look at your physiognomy, that also supports the idea and the notion that you are a deep thinker. You're someone who ponders the world in a very in-depth way. So I want to know what it meant for you. What did you derive from me saying that? Because it's a very abstract thing to say as well, of course.
It was, do you know what it felt like visually? And I think I do translate a lot into the visual side of my brain. I saw a wonderful abstract painting, and I do appreciate abstract, some paintings that are abstract, that are not trying to be clever, but that are really the artist putting on the canvas little arrows in a way for me to be allowed to contemplate that work and then be stimulated into thinking differently about something. It was very moving for me because it wasn't judgmental, but within it, it was saying, do you think this community in New Zealand or this community in the world has been utterly beguiled and possibly, really misled? The hive mind has within it that idea of deep manipulation and the inability to think critically anymore. Some kind of shades of hypnosis are in that statement of yours. It was something that just sat with me. And what I most loved about it was, it wasn't saying it's right or wrong. It was saying, has something taken away your full freedom to think critically about an issue? But you see, it's a little bit like God, really. When you start to try to put too many words around some concepts, it minimizes it, doesn't it? Have you done
Yes, it
many
does.
posts? Have you done many posts on the divinity? Have you tried
Oh,
to?
yes, several. I get really cheesy about it too sometimes, and rather poetic, right? But people seem to like it and resonate with it. So, who am I to stop doing them? Um, I feel your interpretation is very close to at least like the meaning that I had in mind. And the meaning that I had in mind was something along the lines of, if you scale down, let's take the animal kingdom or so on and so forth. Let's scale it down a little bit. Let's zoom into it and let's think about the world of the insects, right? And when you look at the world of the insects, and of course, like we can also like outline a few connection points with occult teaching and sort of like the mystical tradition and sort of even dark magic or black magic. Like we can talk about anything, but symbolically, like all of these things, like the world of the insects and the world of the insectoids, like they're very linked to this idea that either the male or the female, usually the male, of said insectoid race, there's a very big notion of sacrifice, meaning that, let's say, if you're a hive mind and you have several bodies that you control, as I believe insectoids are, and insects in general are, you have no problem like looking at it from a perspective of like, well, the hive has to survive, and all the men need to go. They've have done their work, they've done their job. I feel like I was watching a documentary a while back. It was about bees, and what's very interesting about bees is, they're introduced and presented to us in a very compassionate way, in compassionate sense. Well, they're hardworking and so on and so forth, but there is a very clearly defined structure there, where there is, let's say, the queen bee, right? But there are certain darknesses and brutalities, right, that you also need to understand about their world. If you look at praying mantis, right, where in order to reproduce, the female eats off and chews off the head of the male, right? There is very deep meaning in there, right? So the world of the insects, which is a hive mind world, when we're talking about different states and modalities of consciousness, it's sort of like this idea permeates in there where it's not about the individual, and it never was. And the idea is that, well, here we are, and in order for us to move on to the next stage, whatever that next stage is, so it's a deep, deep emotion or some sort of primal idea that has to do with survival. And it doesn't matter if the individual is fully disregarded. It doesn't matter if a whole group of individuals is fully disregarded, because as long as the hive mind survives, the idea of the hive mind survives, the egregore, that semi-sentient idea or energy that stands behind it lives on, gets to live on. And you know, when you take that concept and you sort of like put it over human civilization, human living, right?
Which was done in COVID-19, which was at the
Yes,
heart of the manipulation of all of us. Yes.
absolutely. And when you put that over it, then it sort of like starts to make sense of like why certain people would feel a certain way. And to me, as someone who's delved deep in, let's say, psychology or psychotherapy, so on and so forth, I have no problem saying that there's probably a group of people who use the same logic, who use sort of like, I call it the argument of nature, right? To, well, discriminate against the individual. But the idea that we're exploring, let's say you and I, the people who understand that there is divinity and beauty within each individual, we are not ready to make that same sacrifice. That's why we've built societies and civilization and so on and so forth, because we are unwilling to make that sacrifice. We are unwilling to kill off 100 to save 200, right? We are people who believe in the notion, let's say, that there must be a better way. There must be a different way. There must be a less primal and brutal and raw way of dealing with this matter. So here we are.
It's fascinating. I mean, here's a good example of bees. I was seeing the other day an image of bees, a bee being attacked by a horrible big wasp, maybe 3 times bigger than the tiny little worker bee. And so it grabs the bee and it's chomping it up in its mouth, and it's clearly dominating. The others, instead of being intimidated and rushing away and protecting themselves, were suddenly able to, in that hive mind way, somehow communicate, and they all rushed the bee, the wasp, the enormous wasp, and each one attacked a different part of its body, and very quickly that invader had no chance at all, and it itself was dead. Now, let's put that on the human. I saw immediately the parallel with what we can do to the very corrupt UN, what we, the masses, can do to the very corrupt WEF. We, in fact, in each country can do to our corrupt globalist leaders who are selling us out, who are trying to parasite on us and ruin our lives and will not leave us alone and are overreaching into everything. We can gather together and do it. So what am I saying there? I'm saying in certain moments, the hive mind concept can be wonderful. If we can all link hands around the world now, we can defeat the globalists. But it's not happening because they have found ways to divide us off. But the way the hive mind was used was to be cavalier and callous. And what I mean by that is when I first interviewed a 23-year-old New Zealander who was in a wheelchair with neurological damage and shaking, her whole life was lying before her in tatters. I thought, oh, we'll just send that to Jacinda Ardern, that video. No mother, because she was meant to be a mother, Jacinda. I don't believe anything about her anymore, but she was meant to be a mother. No female would look at that at a young 23-year-old and go, that's okay. And I thought, oh, Jacinda will stop the rollout of this poison. It's clearly not good for humans. Well, many, many people sent that video of Casey Hodgkinson, her name was, in 2021, and there was nothing from any politician. And the only thing that came back from some of those uncaring people in mainstream media, of which I used to be a part, to my shame, someone like Sean Plunkett is a man who's just, he just called anybody who questioned the jab cookers, which is an antipodean term for, you're mad. And he said, of course, some people will have to die for it. So there was this cavalier hive mind. There was this, I got through it, I'm okay. But yeah, there'll be others who don't, but that's just part of it, exactly what you're describing. So I will never be a part of a cavalier, uncaring, unquestioning, unthinking hive mind. But if we can come together and use it with our human intelligence and say, now look how we, the many, can outdo the few of the globalists, and we can, and they're just a small class, not of elites, but of parasites, then the hive mind can be employed by us, but always with intelligence and with a humanity where we sacrifice as few of each other as we possibly can, because we really want to look out for one another. Do you see that as a difference?
I do, and I'm going to tell you this. I think we're going to have a wonderful conversation from just what we've sort of like dived into already, and I would love to share with you my ideas both on politics. We might disagree on a few things, even that would be interesting. What you mentioned, it reminded me of a very good example. There's this TV series, like a TV show. Oh my God, what is it called? Peaky Blinders, I believe you've seen it. There's this like
Yes.
say about like gangsters and so on and so forth. So there's this moment in Peaky Blinders that I was watching it several years back, right? And there's a moment in this TV series where Thomas, I believe his name is, the Thomas Shelby, is telling his brother, or they're supposed to make some sort of deal. They're supposed to sell weapons or something, and they're going to get really rich from it, really, really rich from it, right? It's a very lucrative deal. And he says something that sort of like stuck with me a little bit to his brother, in sort of like in a fit of rage. And he tells his brother, excuse my French here, there's going to be a little fucking war in a little fucking place that no one gives a fuck about.
Yes. Yes.
And we're going to make a lot of money. And out of curiosity, now, if you sort of like rewatch that episode, and I went out and searched, well, where is this little fucking place? Well, I want to know, where this war is happening. And apparently it's where I'm from, right? What they were referring to was sort of like the Russian sort of like revolution, civil war that happened here in Georgia. Let's say in Tbilisi, and there's a city here called Kutaisi, right? So that little war that let's say no one cares about, and some people will die. When you say, there are certain individuals who will suffer from this decision, but it's in some far away, distant land that no one really knows about. No one really knows their names. No one knows the names of the villages they live in. Yeah, and me, who is, let's say, in the thick of it, I've sort of like lived through 3 conflicts and wars. I've seen the destruction and sort of like the dismay, right, that it brings. Now, that's not that impressive of a statistic if you're from where I'm from, because there's a sort of like an active military, sort of like a war-torn region of the world. But it's very interesting how this distancing happens for the solipsist mind, where they're unable to empathize with things that are physically distant from them. They're unable to understand that when you say, X amount of people will perish from the jab, but, it is what it is. The decision has to be made. Those numbers, behind those numbers, are actual people. They might be someone they might be your family member. So I was a very, very outspoken critic of the COVID jab, but I'm a smaller account, right? Let's say, right? I don't have the reach that, let's say some of these incredible politicians who are also locally there, right? They have this massive reach in the following. I feel like they've gotten too comfortable with just coming out and saying things like this, where their understanding of the consequences of their own words is so shallow. It's almost incredible to see it, how disconnected they become, and it's almost incredible to see how simple it is to make them conform to the idea of discarding human life, which is arguably, let's say in a spiritual or religious sense, the highest value that the human race holds. Each human life is a direct mirror or image of God. So if we are willing to discard a full image of God, what else are we willing to discard? I would say everything, right?
Oh, I just love that. Because I have seen, particularly in the last 5 years, how they have worked so hard to make us callous. When you work hard in the garden and you get those little blisters on your hands, but then if you work day after day in the garden, those blisters turn into these little calloused bits of skin, and you don't feel the pain of it anymore. And you need that in order to be able to survive, to do the really hard work in the garden. But if we as humans become calloused, if our souls have these sort of carapaces, layers of them from seeing the horrors, and I worry about that amount of horror that comes in online. I mean, at the moment, somehow the algorithm in my thread has picked up the Islamic migrations. It's an important issue into Europe and the UK. But what I'm in fact watching in small clips every day, if I'm not careful, it's so brutalizing, and that's where Islamists are really invading and trying to break down the West. And I mean in visceral terms of rape gangs from Rotherham in the UK right through Europe. There are horrific ways that women are being treated, and you watch that and you can feel a callousness come, not from wanting to be callous, but from, if I take every bit of this into my heart, I actually won't survive. And so one has to pull back and really be careful of the content one puts in one's mind, as much as you are careful of the food that you put in your cells to nourish. Will it be McDonald's that will give you no nourishment, or will it be quality? We have to watch what comes out of this new media, don't we? Because you can just be overwhelmed with the horror, the inhumanity of man to man that can really break people, or it can make them not care.
So there's this method that the KGB tends to use, and I'm more acquainted with sort of like how they run things, again because of geopolitics in the region that I'm from. Sort of like my life has been affected with sort of like how they do politics and propaganda and so on and so forth. And I'm not necessarily sort of like putting my finger on them. I just think it's a very interesting and effective method, and the method is such: when you take a population and you overwhelm it with incredibly negative, brutal, visceral imagery and news, what that population, and this is research, by the way, right? With that how that population, or a large portion of that population, usually responds is by creating an innate desire for the most simplistic interpretation of the events that are going on. So let's say if we overwhelm you, like you said, and I had the same emotion, my heart just couldn't take it anymore, because I am someone who deeply cares for other humans, right?
Yes.
And to see the ravaged destruction, like the almost like a chronic destruction of the human race, what most people do who break under this overwhelming pressure is that they'll say, you know what, here's a simplified version of the events that are currently occurring that I can emotionally and psychologically and spiritually and morally be okay with, so that I can survive. And I don't have what it takes to take the full breadth of exactly the overbearing amount of dastardly, deceptive, like terrible evil that's happening. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing a deterioration of how the individual who is overwhelmed with negativity responds to an ever increasingly brutal and dark world.
Yes.
So in the past, I could also share this with you. My outlook was, you have to somehow fight this, but it's such a thing where it spirals out of control, and the more you fight it, you end up feeding that same voice of dissonance that it creates. Yes. The only way I feel that you can protect yourself and society from this, like I look at it as sort of like, let's take a family as an example. If I asked myself, if I had two daughters, how would I teach them to even interface with such a world? How would I teach them to sort of like resist, or even have the capacity to resist such brutality?
What a crucial question. And not just daughters, but how do I raise my son so he can be a warrior? And this is, you alluded to earlier, but also a deeply beautiful, sensitive man, because only the greatest of warrior men can have the courage to be vulnerable. That I have worked out. So it's not a man who's just a warrior and has a carapace, as I said earlier, a big shield the whole time. But he's able to be that protective, strong, virile, vigilant male who says, you will not hurt my family, you will not hurt my community. That's what they've tried to break so much. But he's also
Absolutely.
within the tenderness of his home, able to be this, what you are both. He's able to access his tenderness, and that takes great strength in a man. So how does one raise that son and those daughters who are protected? It's such a question. What are your thoughts?
But my solution to that is, and I always preach this, and this is the only solution I've found, is that I have to strengthen them, of course, and you can do so that they can interface with the world better and its challenges. I can teach them about beauty and God and the creative act. I can teach them about empathy and compassion and the importance of it. But we both know, because we've both seen how deep the pit of darkness goes, right? So we both know that it's very difficult for a person to think about compassion and empathy and so on and so forth when they're faced with the idea of basic survival. So my idea is this. My vision for the world is, and I call it building your spaceship, is to make your home into the most beautiful thing you can, to create a space. And we could talk about the sort of like the occult or the mystical symbolism behind this ritual. That is what it is. It is a ritual of sorts. To make your home into this battery of your personal energy, this vivid, beautiful thing that is the representation of the inner comfort, harmony, and beauty that you wield as a divine spark of God and God consciousness. And I believe if everyone did that, Liz, I believe if every person made their home into a beautiful place, we would wake up in a completely different world. It would be completely changed.
That brings real that brings something really beautiful up into my throat. It's an expression that's been suppressed as I've looked around New Zealand. We are rushing migrants into this country. It's the same globalist pattern everywhere. But what they're doing to house New Zealanders now who are being forced out of their homes, they can't afford the pricing because that puts such pressure on housing. So it makes pricing, especially for young people here, impossible to achieve a home. So they're putting them literally in boxes. They're putting them in the ugliest containers. You think just of a container wharf, and then you take those containers, you break them open, you put a few windows in, and you pile them on top of each other. What was once a country that an Englishman who came here wrote a book, he said, it's a quarter-acre pavlova paradise. And pavlova is an Australian form of an egg white, basically, cake. That's a very Kiwi and Australian thing. But he was gently mocking New Zealanders, but he said it's a paradise because we all had a quarter acre, which is a significant amount of land on which you can have a play area for your children. You can grow beautiful vegetable gardens like my grandparents did. All of that is being taken away. But above all else, you could create beauty around your home. And what they're trying to do is uglify. It's not even a word, but it should be because it's such an ugly word. Uglify everything. They're trying to make everything ugly in which we live. Our towns are looking uglier now. And that's part of why I moved semi-rurally. I couldn't take the ugliness of Auckland, which is just being denuded in every way, all the beautiful trees being cut down. And I have thought for a while, they're doing it on purpose. Because if you live in ugliness, you can't wake every day in anything but a subconscious malaise, a sort of degradation of what your soul really wants. I just knew that, and you've just articulated it.
It's in the simple things. That's the funny thing about, there's quite a bit of conspiratorial thought where people will say, well, deep underground, and this could be true for all I know, deep underground, there's this secret, there is no need for these things because it's so simple. You can take someone's everyday life and make it just a tiny bit more gray. Like, let's say you make it a tiny bit more gray, like 1% per week, right? In a
Yes.
few weeks, that's a lot of gray, right? And as that occurs, and let's say when we say, the problem with, migrants and so forth, I also share in their common humanity, right? I can look into their eyes, I can look into their face. Well, I'm mainly what I do is physiognomy. I can look into I can see the pain, the struggle, the confusion, and sort of like the primality of the environment that these people have come from, right? So I can
Yes.
also interface with their humanity. And when I say make your home a beautiful place, I mean for them too. And let's say if my home is a beautiful place, and if I have things in my home that I could give to you, for you to also make your home a beautiful place, because if I have a beautiful home and I know its healing effects, then I also want you to have a beautiful home because I want to have a beautiful neighbor, right? But that gentleness, especially in the West, and I will talk about Western men. I'm very critical of Western men, as you might know.
I've
I'll
seen
talk
that.
about that too, right?
Yeah.
Have lost the plot. I truly believe that because um, they have to rediscover themselves in a certain sense. You can't you can't fake virtue, and you can't fake strength, and the acquisition, the dumb and mindless acquisition of resource is not strength or power or influence. None of that matters because what your sort of like self-absorbed way of life has created is that you are now becoming the primary architect of your own nation's demise. And these are beautiful nations. These are, well, let's say, Europe, the West, New Zealand, so on. These are beautiful nations, nations that are sort of like indicative of what humanity as a species can achieve when people sort of like come together and they can create this beautiful, civilized, like societies, right? And then as you sort of like build that out, and then you're inviting the architect behind the very destruction that is being inflicted upon this land. I feel like you really need to sit down and ask yourself, like, where did I go wrong? Like, what was that exact point in time or history where we decided that, okay, this is what we're doing now, guys. Let's just tear it all down. Let's just tear it all apart, right? It's mind-boggling for me as someone who has no stakes in this, where I live in a very remote place. Most times of the year, you can't even get here, right? Like
Wow.
in a very remote place. So I have no stakes in this. So when I look at it, I'm not like, well, I'm for this party or I'm for that party, and I hope someone wins. I'm for the party of humanity, right? But right now, what we're seeing, there is so little gentleness in the world, and how things, even on a political level or an individual level, especially if you go on X or any other social media, how people communicate with one another is so incredibly regressive. I'm like, this is it. Like, we've gone through evolution. Our ancestors, bled each other out to death, on the
Yes.
battlefield several times over. For us to not even understand that the most important part of this human experience, this test of life, right, is to just find harmony with the other.
Oh, it's such a treat. And as you talk, there are so many directions I can go in. I've kept trying to find that moment when I can pull out of these beautiful deep waters in which we're swimming. Just to do what I normally do in any kind of interview is at least establish the who, what, where, why, when. I'm from a mainstream media background initially and turned my back on that because I saw how it lies. But those who, what, why, when are useful questions. So can we just come up to the very surface layers for a moment, and just talk briefly about who you are, why you like to be anonymized online, and I really respect that. I think it's going to be a wonderful listening podcast. I actually want to put in a quick request at this level. Jack, would you consider doing a series of discussions with me and
Oh,
we
I would
make
love
it.
to. I would be
Yeah,
honored to.
I would really love to, because as you speak, there's just no way this can be contained. It's like a beautiful, glorious kind of wild animal that's allowing me into its presence. And I'm not talking about you there, I'm talking about the capacity of the human mind for this absolute beauty that won't be contained in this discussion. So Jack, who is Jack of Faces, and why did you choose that name?
I don't know why I chose the name. I thought it sounded really cool, and well, it's associated with physiognomy, which is what I do
You're
for the most
a
part.
master face reader. A master face reader. I love the name because it's got this gorgeous enigma. You know, the Jack, and often in cards, has a certain enigmatic quality. The Jack in nursery rhymes. It's a beautiful name. I loved it. It
Oh, thank you
sums you
so
up really
much.
well. Yeah.
Thank you so
But
much.
what is a master face reader? What is that, and how did you come to that?
Well, initially, I was far from a positive character, I would say. I um, have always been very detail oriented as a person, and I have a good background in psychology and social work and psychotherapy, and I spent a number of years working in these fields. Obviously, where I'm from, these disciplines are far less respected and far less developed. So then I went into sort of like learning from the international scene, and fortunately for me, I had very good language skills as well. From early on, I started learning the English language and many other languages early on as well. Um, and I created this, basically like the social media page that I did to, I guess, share spiritual insights. I also come from a family that is carries a sort of like a spiritual tradition, I would say, a tradition of mysticism. And generally, where I come from, like Georgia is a very ancient country. There's a lot of like ancient, tradition here. It is one of the first Christian countries ever, next to Armenia, the second Christian country to officially sort of like take up, but with an incredibly rich pagan history as well. So I was always exposed to mysticism and so on and so forth from a very early age, and perhaps even the types of mysticism that is relatively unknown to the world, especially the Western world, right? I feel like you can take a lot of spirituality and so on and so forth from where I'm from, which I call my region the armpit of the world, because it's very useful. It's there, but no one really sees it a lot, and no one wants to talk about
But
it.
the body would be very sick without its good functioning. I love it. What? And I had no idea it was the second Christian country. What are the countries that border Georgia, and what is Georgia like? I mean, I'm fascinated now. I really do. I'm fascinated by Russia at the moment, so I really want to come to your part of the world. But just explain, give us an idea of your country.
So, Georgia is a strange country. It's in the Caucasus region. It's a
Yes.
very mountainous country, and the history of it is also very delicate and sort of like complex. Obviously, like everyone knows about our conflict with Russia, and some of the countries that border Georgia are Armenia, Azerbaijan. We have a sea, the Black Sea, and that's bordered by Bulgaria and Romania. And to the north, we have the Northern Caucasus, which is right now under, well, Russian rule. It's basically Russia now. But we Caucasians, or how we call ourselves, the cultures of the Caucasus, we're basically like white people in Asia, I guess you could say that, but slightly different. It's a warrior culture, I would say. Chechnya, Dagestan, Caucasia, Ingushetia, all these countries, they are to the north of us, right? And even though there are some definitive tensions between these countries, we're still sort of like one people culturally.
Would you say that with the
Portions,
Russians too, a bit like
yeah.
Ukraine? There's been such intergenerational mixing that there were Ukrainians who literally in this nonsense fabricated war didn't know if they were Russian Ukrainians or Ukrainians with some Russian blood, or were they wanting
So
to separate? Is it like
that's a
that
great
too?
That's a great question. And I feel like there's differences there. And I feel like maybe there's more complexity there as well. So, for example, in the Caucasus, because it's such a sort of like mountainous and isolated region, you don't get a lot of intermixing. So, let's say the Caucasian peoples and the Slavic peoples from Russia and Ukraine, they don't really intermix much with, let's say, Georgians and Northern Caucasians. When it comes to Slavic peoples, like Ukrainians and Russians, at least the Slavic portion of Russians, it's relatively hard to tell them apart. So I feel like um, maybe not culturally, but in sort of like genetically and in terms of phenotype, it's more difficult to tell them apart. But if you saw like a Caucasian man who's usually sort of like a little bit wider, more stocky, sort of like muscular built, and a Slavic man from Russia, you would immediately tell the difference, right? Like Russians are a little bit more fair. They have sort of like, they often have like blue eyes, where Caucasians are pale skinned still, but they have a darker complexity. They will have, like deep set brown eyes, usually bearded, right? Or, body hair, facial hair. So in many ways, we are quite different. With Russia and Ukraine, just for context, I have friends, and this is a big pain point for me, right? I have friends who are fighting, and they're valiant, valorous people who are fighting on both sides of this war in Ukraine and Russia.
Wow.
So I'm sort of like torn, right? And I'm also from a country, so I might be biased, of course, in that sense, and maybe even justifiably so. I'm from a country that Russia has caused a lot of pain to, right? I have grown sort of like under the shadow of their rule. Where, let's say, historically, my country has been annexed by Russia, and a lot of the people that I belong to, the Caucasians, like a lot of people don't know this. The Caucasian people, so on and so forth, they have been fully genocided by the Russian Empire. We call it the 100-Year War. It's a war that spanned for over 150 years in the Northern Caucasus region. This is why this region is known for its sort of like militaristic, very, rough and tough, type of living, and wars in Chechnya and Dagestan. So basically my whole, living, the early portion of my life was this strange, primal, animalistic idea of survival and just seeing people and the fallout of these several micro wars that have been happening in the region. Yeah, we could talk about this too. Like I have my opinions on global politics as well. Now, I'm no expert in this field, admittedly, as well, and I do not claim to be. But there's such a topic to explore. There's just so much to talk about,
There's
like in this sense.
so much to talk about here. What I keep getting as you describe your people and the mountains, I keep getting the mountains, and I get warriors on horses. Are horses a big part of your?
Yes.
It's overwhelming, the imagery.
Not in a sense of like a steppy sense, right? I feel like they're more part of the background rather than a part of the identity of the Caucasian peoples.
What are the lineages that feed into you? For example, mine was, from prior to New Zealand was Scottish, and I have some French in me, but prior to Scotland was Scandinavian, obviously, in the Viking bloodlines. And I think that's fed through to my courage. In the last 5 years, it's in me to stand up. What are the streams that feed into the river of you?
What a powerful lineage that is, firstly, that you have, that you carry. For me, I am as local as it gets. There are two tribes here in Georgia. One is the Svan tribe, where my father is from, and the Megrelian tribe, where my mother is from. So sort of like a mixture of these two peoples. I identify, I guess, culturally as more like Svan, but I'm just, Caucasian is how I would call myself. Svan's like the place where they live. They're very simple, humble people, quite temperamental, I would say, and relatively like, isolated. They like to keep to themselves in a sense. I love where I'm from, and I don't like sort of like creating this fantastical image of it, like we're over dramatizing it, or I'm just one person from a very, very remote part of the world. But I do believe that there are cultural heritages and heritages of tradition and spiritualism that I can share with the world. There's not a lot of people from my part of the world that speak good English, for example. So it's very hard to communicate some of the things, right, that you would want to communicate with people. Let's say, even if we talk about Russia, I know a lot about Russian culture, for example, and I know probably a lot more than the average person. So sometimes when someone tells me, well, like this is exactly what's happening in that region, sometimes it's strange for me because I've been here, my friend, right? Here I am. Like I can tell you what's been happening if you are willing to listen, and I will try to be the most unbiased I can be in order to provide to you the truth of what's going on, right?
How was your childhood with this level of brain power, with this level of intellect? How was the little Jack? What was it like?
Well, it's not like I always had it, right? It's the
You must have
result
been
of
born with a deeply questioning mind. You must have. You
yes,
must have, as a child, looked around and gone, "Nothing's
yes,
quite fitting with what's inside my head." I see.
yes. It was quite rough, and it's strange to describe it now. But if you if you came to the country now, it's wonderful. It's great, beautiful nature, mountains, people. There's a little bit of poverty, but it is what it is. Obviously, it's not a first world country, but uh, if you sort of like roll back time, like let's say 15 years ago or 10 years ago, this place was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. So you would have daily stabbings, shootings, fights. If you were a lady, let's say, and you wore a nice earring, you went down on the street with a nice earring, they would rip your earring off, ear included, right off of your head. So it was a very difficult time. And I feel like I never even got to live the first probably like 15, 16, 17 years of my life, because all I remember from those years, and there's a lot of like blackness in there too, is just survival, like just surviving the world, not being cold, being fed enough, that type of thing, like not being bullied, that type of thing, like fighting all the time, a lot of fighting, a lot of like the Caucasus is a very physical place. Like people look at strength and sort of like value strength a little bit differently here, because you're sort of like the expectation that is put on you, especially if you're a male, is that you're incredibly physically capable. um I don't know what it is with our culture, but let's say if you look at even like very sports that are very physical, if you look at like judo or wrestling or grappling or any sort of like powerlifting or arm wrestling or whatever, it's always like this overbearing amount of Caucasians. Some of them, or let's say most of the athletes that Russia has on their roster, like about 95% of them are from the Caucasus region in these sports and in the Olympics usually. So there's a very large emphasis on being physically capable, and that was very difficult for me as well, because while I am very physically capable, I would say, and I've become quite physically capable over time, I also had a very sort of like poetic or like sort of like artsy or creative or spiritual side to me that was rather difficult to express, right?
Was that because of great poverty that it was so brutal? There was just an impoverishment across the nation, and that really made people just everyone for themselves. Is that what you're
You
saying?
know, how it happened. I feel like it's a mixture between the cultural sort of like background and the temperament, because people are very temperamental here, and they're very physical. But I think it's, a lot of people like to talk about war as if the war is like the thing that is happening on the battlefield. But the war, like a war, is so much more than that. It's not just like some event that happened on a battlefield. But the real war happens after the battle. The real war is like the fallout after the fact, where the banks are closing up. There's no money, no resource, no water, like sort of like no electricity. There's nothing in there. So that is the real war, when people en masse are put into this state of, I must survive no matter the cost. And that was what my childhood felt like. It was like being born into this age where a great conflict happened, and I was reaping all of the sort of like the fallout of that terrible conflict, right? That's what it felt like, I would say.
This is extraordinary. So your parents, they weren't able to spend necessarily a lot of time nurturing you and tuning into you, perhaps, and bringing forth both that manliness and that, and nurturing and protecting that sensitivity. Were you more on your own? Was it this deep thinking little boy just really, in a way, raising himself? Or is that too presumptuous? Have I gone too far there?
No, I don't think that's too presumptuous. You are asking me the important questions, so I'll tell you that. Well, what I can tell you is, but at least from how I remember it, I would not say that I had a particularly terrible childhood, in the sense, well, in a comparative sense, compared to some of the people I know who are, my friends and so on and so forth. I've sort of come out of it relatively unscathed, because I have been able to nurture myself back into, well, health, right? But I feel like when you're in that situation, parents don't think in the sense of how they would think if they were not. So I think what they prioritized was the basic survival toolkit, so to speak, right?
Yes.
They had their efforts to, let's say, shelter their children, as every parent would, of course. And obviously, eventually, those efforts failed, because you live in a very hostile environment. So yes, there were some things, like, let's say, how, I guess, what people from the West, when I talk to them, like tourists and such, I guess, what they fail to understand and interface with is like, no, I don't have like a college skill set. No, I don't know how to make notes about my workday. Like, no, I don't know how to create a calendar for myself, right? Like, all of these skills that you're usually taught, like the skills that I was taught is, how to talk to a police officer without getting beat or captured, how to, fend off the big bully, right? How to fight, how to create a makeshift weapon if I needed to, sort of like how to, I don't know, like, yeah, make more of the food that is just, like not that type of thing, right? Nowadays, I feel all of these things empowered me, and like I always say, I can live off of dirt if I needed to, which is great. But back then, it wasn't half as much fun.
It's extraordinary, the training. And that is actually where, if we really take Agenda 2030 and we really take what the globalists want to do to the world, certainly to the West, that's what they want. They want us utterly impoverished. It's like Mao Zedong, when he took the professors out of the universities and put them in the fields, and took the farmers and put them, he did that disruption in order to impoverish and limit the possibilities of each human within his society, so they would end up on their knees. And Marxist communism depends on this, because then you can dictate, we'll give you a very, very little bit, maybe very meager, and it became that, but you will be so dependent on us and so broken that we will have all the power and you will have no ability to stand up. So it's really interesting what you say. You've been trained, because this brokenness in the vision that they have for the West is something most people in the West are still struggling to come to terms with, because they've had it so easy. And some of your posts write about men of the West and how soft they have become. You alluded to the very, very wealthy. Those who I've talked to who are very wealthy, I'm just gobsmacked. I'm thinking of a few multimillionaires here. I'm gobsmacked. They'll give a very small amount maybe to help those who are fighting on the front lines. but there is an innate selfishness. And I've often felt like saying to them, you know that when people like us fall, you will be next. You know that your lifestyle of wealth and travel and, extreme material well-being will all evaporate if this vision that they want to implement in the world is brought to bear. And you need the warriors like us who are willing to stand up battered and bruised and keep pushing back on globalism. But they don't. They think we've got money, so we'll be all right. We'll be separate. But they won't be. They're all looked down on. So we're just getting back to your life. You've been trained in this warrior way, whereas in the West I see so many soft and selfish people who would have benefited, ironically, from that kind of hardening up. But it's a hardening up where you haven't become callous, and that's what's extraordinary.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
They don't comprehend it, and I feel like there's a sort of like, when someone comes out from another part of the world and they something as rude, like let's say if someone said that about me, where if someone said like you're not tough enough, pal, I would take offense to that, and I realized that that sentiment is not something that like the average person or the average male in the West would like to hear. But the truth is, I would say the truth is this: when you talk about communism, and when you talk about how they approach and how they deteriorate societies, is they'll take the best of that society and they will completely remove it from the equation. Once that is done, once that is removed, the next thing they're going to do is we have a saying, I guess, here that goes like, the first ones who break are the ones who get recruited. That's how communism looks at it. So let's say you break, you are in this fear-based mind state of I have to survive. They've got you, right?
Yes.
And after that happens, after that occurs, the disconnect happens in the sense where the ideology among most people, like what without taking sides, what I can tell most people in the West is that they have such a warped idea of what communism and socialism is. They have no understanding whatsoever with what they're dealing with. And I always give this example, and I'm going to give you this example too, because I find it like very funny also, but also fascinating. Like when you build a chair, like you're supposed to design a chair. What do you think about, like, what kind of chair would you like to design? Well, you would probably say, well, a human being is supposed to sit on that chair, so it better be a comfortable chair, right? Like, well, when you sit on it, your back shouldn't hurt, right? Right? It shouldn't be cold to the touch. It should be comfortable, right? But how communism views it is like there's this uniformity to it, and the most important thing when they design a thing is that it's long lasting, and that it is the most basic variation of a thing that could possibly be called a chair. So, for example, it has something to sit on, which is metallic and cold to the touch. It has parts that cannot break, so that it can be used for the longest amount of time, and you won't need to change it or swap it out, right? It has a backrest where your back is supposed to go, but it breaks your back. That's how terrible it feels. I spent my whole school year sitting on chairs like this, right? So I have a personal vendetta against chairs. And
Yes.
let's say it's winter time and you sit down on one of these chairs. They're fully metallic. It's like a torture chamber thing, right? When you sit in these chairs and they freeze your thighs off, right? It's so terrible. And they are nasty in the sense that they have been in use for 25, 30 years, like just nonstop. But when a small part of it breaks off, they just weld it back together. They send it to a factory somewhere. They just weld it back together. And they'll give you this chair back, and it smells terrible. It feels terrible. It's cold to the touch. There's nothing human about it. There's nothing. It's not even built for a human being. It's just built for the sake of being called a chair. It just like has the basic prerequisites of being called this thing that it functionally needs to be. Now you take that chair and you scale that up into everything else that they've built, and the philosophy of how they treat architecture and even art and even social like services and like social constructs. That is the face of communism and socialism. So when I see people from the West and they have this, and I don't blame them for this, partially because they're probably confused, but when they have this incredible empathy with the idea of uniformity, forced uniformity, right? Which is what these people are all about. And I'm telling them, my friend, I love you so much. You do not want to sit on that chair. Like you don't want your children to sit on that chair. You don't.
Gosh, that chair is the metaphor too for those houses I was describing. They're putting up here.
Yes.
And there's a phrase in English, pack 'em and stack 'em. It's not about the boxes, the containers. It's about the people. Pack 'em and stack 'em. And that gets back to that idea, Jack, of just be cavalier as a leader. It doesn't matter about them out there. We used to talk about Marie Antoinette in the French Revolution, let them eat cake was a metaphor that she just was so out of touch with her own people. But these people who are wanting to introduce communist Marxist principles in order to have the most control over the most people so they, the few, can have the best of everything while the rest have nothing, they know exactly what they're doing. They know they are in touch. They just are going, those people out there are the masses and they don't matter. And it's actually come from I think, the excessive greed of the corporates. And it's the same thing that those multimillionaires I've interacted with here, some of them just have such a selfish attitude. As long as I'm all right. There's another phrase in English, I'm all right, Jack. It's meaning, hey, mate, I'm okay. So there you go. It's the opposite of what you stand for. Whereas I'm with you. I flourish when I loved what you said earlier, Jack. I flourish when I see my neighbor is flourishing. I flourish when I build a town that has beauty in it and spaces for children to run in that bring them into beauty. And when we could encourage beauty in gardens around and beauty in the way we treat each other's, everything, bodies, the food that we grow, the healthcare that we offer. Your body is sacred. This community is, the body politic is sacred. We are here to serve one another. So many times, Jack, I've had a sense of, what am I doing in this world? I used to joke, I landed on the wrong planet because I see so effortlessly such a different way to run society. Was that what it was like as you were sitting on those cold chairs in those classrooms? Were you daydreaming, one day I'm going to live in a very different way from what's being taught to me here?
My dream early on was to move to America, because back then everything in the West, like we couldn't differentiate, let's say, what the lifestyle differences were between, let's say, Australia or New Zealand or America. Like for us, like the construct of the West was like, okay, like we know that there's some distant message that we have received, that people actually live well somewhere off in I don't know, like this distant land, right? So my idea was, I hated here. I used to hate it here, and I always said and to me, for a lot of people here, sports is a way to get out of the country. And let's say in the Russian-controlled territories as well, in the Northern Caucasus, that's where you see them overrepresented in sports, because if you're successful in sports, you can get out of here, right? Make some money. But for me, it was always an academic path. So I thought, like, well, if I do well in my education, I can perhaps move. But ironically, so I found myself rediscovering the suffering and torment and the anguish that my country and its sort of like history has been put through, and I fell in love with this place because I sort of like came to terms with it. Now I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. I want to live here. I want to die here. I will be a happy man. So I did not feel miserable, but I felt like I had missed out on so much. Not that I had actually missed out on so many good things, but I wish, when I imagine it, like it's fine if my children don't have the best of everything, but to me, I find it difficult to come to terms with the idea that my children should go through the same things that I've had to go through. Like it's the tormentful parts that are incredibly painful to inflict upon my child who doesn't even exist yet. But when I think of that, it's so difficult to put them through it. So I say, when you talk about this ugliness, they do this because they know that beauty is the means through which we interface with God, and the means through which we interface with divinity and the divine presence. For someone who does not house a divine presence already in their mind, these are individuals. It takes incredible willpower to do so. You need the external stimulant almost, right? You need the external to show you that, hey, there is something greater, there is something grander, there's something more grandiose, more harmonious, more in balance, more beautiful and pure and clean that you can strive towards. That's what they want to remove. And when I say they, um, you know, I don't even necessarily mean specific individuals. I mean this hive mind, which I call an egregore. And if our listeners don't know what an egregore is, it is this sentiment or idea that when people believe in something, right, in a belief system or sentiment or so on and so forth, a sort of like semi-conscious energetic current is created out of this collective belief. And the only purpose for this egregore, this blob of energy, is for it to grow. That's the only purpose it has. And how it grows is by allowing you to transmute your energy. So let's say you give my egregore a little bit of your devotion and energy and propaganda and campaigning and so on and so forth. And the egregore will give you back in a material sense, right? So I feel like these people are stuck in this line of thinking where they're like, as long as I serve the big bad machine won't swallow me up, right?
Yes.
That's how I feel.
So take that idea. So COVID-19 was an egregore. It was an idea. It was a blob of an idea and propaganda and manipulation and bullying. And the people allowed it to be something to which they bowed. They bowed down. And at
Yes.
that point they gave it energy, and then it grew. And once they'd bowed down, they became part of that blob as well, telling others to bow down, because I have, so you'd better. Have I
And
got that right?
I think you do. I think, COVID-19 specifically for me, and usually I'm not someone who's radically like opposed or radically for something, but COVID-19 to me was so one-sided. When I look at it, and with, let's say, we sort of like decipher what it really was about. For me, what it really was about was using the best of humanity against it. So using your sentiments of compassion and your nurturing sort of like
Yes.
nature, and just being like, well, if you care about the other, I know you don't want to get it. I know you intuitively, like every fiber of your body is telling you there's something fishy going on here. Why is the government giving me something for free? When has the government ever given me something for free? Right?
Yes.
Now take the jab because you might harm the other. And that was when I knew that we were dealing with a completely different level of deception tactic. So if the deception tactic was, oh my God, this dangerous virus and you should really protect yourself, I would be like, well, okay, we've seen this before. It's sort of like this vanilla manipulation tactic of the masses. But this was an upgrade. This
Yes.
was a deliberate upgrade that was aimed at the most vulnerable piece of the human spirit, which is the idea that if I don't do this, that I'm pressured to do this thing, I might hurt the people I love the most. And this
Yes.
was wow for me. I was like, there is no way I'm touching this thing, right?
Yes. Oh, it's so interesting. You know, people. I know some people from Russia, and because of the history of Russia, they were the first ones to say this is a load of nonsense. We've seen this before. Friends in South Africa, again, that whole we've seen the government lies and manipulations. Of course, this is a con. But here in New Zealand, we had this plausible young woman who was pretending, and there had been a setup with a mosque shooting earlier, supposedly in Christchurch. I say supposedly because my personal belief is there's something that needs to be investigated, but was totally shut down. And I haven't gone in there, but my gut feeling is something was not right. However, it propelled her onto the world stage, Jacinda Ardern, as this saintly creature. And when I would look at that footage, I'd think, I should feel really kind of inspired by this woman, but I don't. That she feels like an actor with a hijab on. Well, boy, did that ever come to be true, that gut feeling. But it was so manipulative. And in this small community, we're just over 5 million here. How many in Georgia? How many people in Georgia?
2.5 million, 3 million, I believe.
Oh, wow,
We're a very
smaller than
small
us.
nation.
It's easy to
Yes.
manipulate a small nation. And it was care for the old, care for the old. Now, cut to 3 years later, and I put out the Ministry of Health data from this very brave whistleblower who's going to be facing a trial for up to 7 years in prison. They have spent over 2 million, possibly closer to $3 million on lawyers and teams of people going through this information. They've never been able to find one name that was revealed. There's never been one breach of personal security, but they are still going through with the theatre of the trial. And people wrote off this data that was the people's data of New Zealand by saying, oh, you know, it's only old people who are dying. And I'm going, wait a minute, when you did the manipulation, the whole thing was, you've got to save every old person and you are a absolutely selfish rotter if you don't take this jab because one old person might die. And those people who were manipulated in that way have never been able to put those two parts together. It's those people who write off the government hiding the truth of excess deaths that's in that data because they're now going, oh, it's only old people who died. But there are young people in that data. There are all ages, of course.
They're
But
all ages.
yeah, the manipulation of it. And we are still very much in the thick of propaganda. And there are still many New Zealanders who are, you know, the dead-eyed zombie kind of march towards now, whatever the government tells me I will do. Just back to your childhood, though. How did the last 10 years change? Because you said it was really only in the last 10 to 15 years that things changed where you are. How did they change? What caused that?
I think what caused it was the last war we had with Russia was in 2008. And this was not a conflict that lasted for a long time. It was a brutal few days, but it only lasted for a few days. And after that conflict was over, there was this, you know, sense in the country of like, okay, it's time to sort of like rebuild and sort of like westernize the country. And that's where, you know, things start to get a little bit, you know, more easier. Like, let's say in the past, like you know, because of my trauma, let's say, I still don't trust the authorities or the police here. But you have to admit, if you're honest, objective, that, you know, things have changed here. Like, there is far less police brutality, so on and so forth, even though the region is still incredibly unstable. But I would say after 2008, things changed here. And you could finally have a lifestyle where you could actually plan a meeting with someone like a week prior, and that meeting would happen, right? Like no crazy thing would happen where you would, you know, your plans would immediately change. So planning, like Georgians are very bad at planning because of this, because we don't do planning, or we didn't do planning. Like, we're just getting used to like doing things, like basic things like this, because you never know what's going to happen. So you sort of like live like day by day, and it sort of like ruins your everything, right? So I would say, you know, I was introduced to the more primal, darker side of the world, I would say, through my childhood, which was a very physical and visceral. But I feel like later on I was introduced to the more psychological, darker side of the world through understanding like geopolitics and international, like whatever we spoke about. And let's say even now, like, I think most people don't understand how dark these things are. And I talk about them to help others understand just what's going on, so they understand the degree of the evil. So, for example, there's this video they did, like going back to COVID-19, I guess. There's this video they did of like there's these dancing doctors in these like empty hospitals that they did and
Oh,
put. I'm sure you've seen it.
they're
And
sickening. They were
there's
everywhere. Oh, they're
yeah, there's
just
like
sickening.
this African song over this, like they're singing and dancing and spinning around. Like, what do you have to dance for? And then I just realized, when you research old manuscripts of sort of like dark ritual, um, so I'll give you a very nasty example. Okay, uh, how the dark magician thinks about these things. There always has to be the element of the fool or the clown jester in any sort of ritual. And anyone you talk to who, let's say, is well versed in the occult arts and they understand the meaning of ritual, they will tell you that there's always the element of the sort of like the unwilling participant who willingly steps into the space of the ritual. So, for example, if you're going to a nightclub and there's this song that's like blasting in the nightclub and you dance to this song, right? And um, this song has, let's say, a pre-recorded element to it, right? And the pre-recorded element to that is, let's say, Liz, if you and I torture a man, right? And then we record his desperate wailing, right?
Yes.
And then we mix it and mash it into our music. And then we go and play this music in a big fancy nightclub where all these people come in and they wine and dine and dance and sway and they have a great, jolly good time, dancing to the music. Do they know what they're dancing? And no, they don't. But they are the unwilling participants. They are the fool within the ritual. And this is why the ritual works. So this is what these people believe. And this is how the participation is created there. So when we look at COVID-19, to me at least, it has all of these ritualistic symptoms, right? When like, oh, what are you dancing about? There's people dying, there's people suffering, there's people being tormented. And here you are, instead of working and being on the front lines, you're giving me a video of people dancing. So I know what you're doing. Right. And those who are sort of like intuitively in touch and sort of like sensitive to these things, they also know what you're doing. Right.
The dancing was even worse because a friend of mine who was an ambulance officer said when he used to go into the hospitals in Auckland, there was no pandemic. There were no sick people in New Zealand. There was no illness when they were saying it was a pandemic and locking us down. And the waves of illness began only when Jacinda Ardern forced those jabs on us. So the reason all these idiots around the world were doing those embarrassing dances, coordinated dances, and obviously sent script from, in the centre, was partly to fill in their time, but partly to it was this ludicrous idea that they were such heroes. There was a Canadian doctor, Mark Trozy, I was listening to on Freedom Train International, which I'm part of. It's a really good idea. It's a people's movement around the world, and we do weekly specials. It comes from Jim Ferguson in the UK, and it's the idea that people from countries from all over the world will talk to one another, and we can see now, just talking the patterns, the way it was lockstep in every country. It's really interesting when you talk across borders, but it's bubbling up from the ground up. It's not imposed from the top down. So we're just slowly building this. And this Canadian doctor was just talking about how, how utterly fraudulent he knew it was. And his neighbours across the road, because he was a doctor in the early days of the pandemic there, had put signs on their walls, "You're a hero, you're our hero." That was all managed. We'll dance and we'll bang pots and we'll put up signs that the doctors are heroes. And he said, I had no work. There were no sick people. I knew that it was all a fraud. It was just embarrassing to me. But the news every night was spilling out this totally different propaganda. And coming from where you've come from, you would recognize all those patterns. It's just a way to manipulate a hive mind.
So I think they needed a small amount of people. Like I had the actual virus, and let's say as soon as I had it, brutalized me, by the way. It
Were
was,
you
I had
unjabbed?
it,
Can I ask? Were you
I
unjabbed?
was unjabbed. I was unjabbed. Yeah, I didn't take the jab at all. I refused to take it. And
Mm,
I had the virus and it was very tough on me. Like I could barely breathe. And
mm.
as soon as I got it on the very first day, but the very first thought that I had, because my body felt the way it had never felt before and I've had many viruses, many types of viruses. The first thing I said, there's no way this is a natural virus. That's the first thought that came to my mind. There's no way this is like some just, oh, it just, happened to be a virus. Here's the new strain. What? Because it was so brutal on the body. And then I have friends, let's say from Central Europe, who were telling me that, you know what, there are people who are getting the virus and it's, quite difficult to sort of like bear it. But at the same time, if you go to the hospital, all they're doing, like they're just telling everyone they have the virus. Like everyone
Yes.
had the virus, but it's not true. Like a certain amount of people globally, internationally, definitely had the virus, but the amount of people that had the virus, that's a ridiculous number, because all of these hospitals, as far as I know, and I'm told, and from trusted sources, and I trust them, um, the hospitals would get all kinds of benefits, right? If they wrote it off, like wrote deaths off as, oh, it's a COVID, oh, you probably have COVID, just do this lockdown. So the psychological effect of the lockdown is like, no sun for you, isolation. Let's bring out all of the worst parts of you and let's scare you and terrifying you into sort of like sitting in your little box, right?
Yes.
And see how you respond to this sort of like global, hypnosis program that we're basically like running right now. And
Yes.
again, of course, I had the virus, and some people say in a conspiratorial sense, "Oh, there was no virus at all." There was definitely a virus. I had it myself, right, for example, but it was so blown out of proportion, so incredibly blown out of proportion for some ridiculous, I don't even know, like some sort of weird profit margin or some sort of like global conformism experiment, right? The people behind it are very smart. I can say that, right? Like the people who, structured this and sort of like ran with it and how they dealt with it and the amount of deliberate thought that was put into what the propaganda was like. And like, let's say, I was called for, let's say, for not getting a jab, like they would sort of like in the media they would just call you, oh, you're blind, you're like this, like caveman, like you have no
Yes.
IQ, what are you doing? Like it was brutal, right?
Absolutely. I'm really fascinated by this idea, Jack, because you're so attuned to the it's funny to find the words for this, to the sort of ether. You feel as if you have antennae that go out into what is going on in the world, and some people are gifted this. I know a man here who has the same. He's extremely attuned to
Mm.
the zeitgeist, we could say. And there's a couple here who are doctors in New Zealand. The woman has a very big following around the world, and her thesis is that there are no viruses. And she's adamant that anybody who even talks about a virus, they didn't support when we put out the Barry Young data, which would have stopped all of this tyranny, because the whole thing was rolled out as a first experiment in how much tyranny can we get away with. That's what I believe. And it was only the first line. It was followed by the climate change wrought, which is another version following the same patterns, more tyranny, more oppression. How much will people take? How much can we bully them? They're just rolling out waves of this program of bullying, because really the ultimate game is we want to bring the masses to their knees. We want them to have a miserable life. We basically want them to escape into AI. We haven't even broached that. We'll do that next time. And not even have to really give them a nice world here, because we can just give them an online world with minimal food made out of crickets. And, they're rubbish people. And we, the few, like King Charles, that ridiculous buffoon on the UK throne, we will have everything. We'll drive our Bentley to Europe, to Rome for a conference on climate change. We'll ship it over and drive it. I mean, that's what he did. He actually shipped his Bentley car and then drove his Bentley gas guzzling car through Rome to a climate change conference. I mean, you couldn't write this stuff if
It's
Shakespeare wrote.
appearances.
It's
Yeah,
just
it's
ludicrous.
appearances.
But the point is that the crucial thing is, I think you may have picked up the incoming trauma. And could that have made you sick? I'm only playing with this idea because I haven't deeply researched this idea that there aren't viruses, that it is all dependent on the environment within us and the environment without. So say you are eating McDonald's rubbish food every day, you must have a great deal of poison in your body that will eventually cause an imbalance, a dis-ease, a lack of ease, a disease. And you will get sick if you have an internal environment that's so compromised. So you clean up your environment. If you take the metaphor that you look at a fish swimming around in a little bowl and the water is dirty and you do some drops to clean up the water, but it's not deeply clean, as opposed to really getting that fish in beautiful water with some plants in the water, and it will be a much healthier fish. So it's the same for us. Could it have been, Jack, that you ahead of time attuned yourself to incoming, there is some great trauma that's going to wash around the world, and you have that warrior energy, but you combine it with that beautiful sensitivity that threw your whole body out of balance. Where do you stand on the virus, non-virus hypothesis?
So I also had that thought because I like to think of these things from every perspective, no matter how fantastical, because I've seen quite a bit of irrational and fantastical things occur in life. And we could talk about this later on as well. But my primary thing and what I appreciate and admire in people the most is to remain steadfast and honest and as objective as one can be in the face of the proof that is provided. So I would be incredibly dishonest if I said that, oh, it was some sort of psychosomatic link or some sort of spiritual illness. It was, for me personally, it was so brutally physical. It was so incredibly like, it's difficult to even describe it, but it physically demolished my body, even though my mindset or my headspace was relatively okay. And it gave me incredible depression later on too, as I had the virus, because I felt like my body was sort of like, like almost like close to being unable to sustaining itself. And I've also heard that like sometimes with like healthy people who like, let's say, regularly work out and exercise, sometimes they have like even worse than others, and other times they don't. And when I think of this, right, I have to be honest about it, and I have to say that yeah, I feel like it was so physical. I feel it was such like a weighted material thing that I experienced and the people around me experienced. I got it late, like from like the people who infected me or my good friends. I got it
Yes.
like 3 4 days late, but so I was taking care of them because they were really really sick. And then like 3 4 days after I got it, and I was like, well, I'm okay. I'm nothing that's really going on with me. But when I got it, was so brutal. And even when like I think that quality is very important. It's a very admirable quality where yes, we might share certain biases and even certain agendas, but if we are unable to interface with the objective truth, we lose the plot. We lose the idea of like, okay, what is the real picture? What's really going on? Like it's never black and white for me.
Yes.
And even though I can say that yes, there are probably some very despicable players and some very despicable people behind COVID-19, not everything about it is a sham, right? And if I can
It's
allow myself
fascinating.
to think that, I can get myself closer to the truth. No, the dancing and thing is definitely a sham. The psychological manipulation is definitely there. But I'm very well versed in psychosomatic illness, right? And having experienced it on myself, I can say that 99% most likely not psychosomatic, like even 100%, right? It's very physical for me.
Were you helping friends who had been jabbed?
No, no.
So
Everyone was yeah.
Unjabbed. No, that's
Yeah.
really important. Gosh, that really helps my perspective too, because I know when I interviewed the jab injured in the early days, and they're suffering so much, and I couldn't not have done this. I had to hug them at the end. I was really important, and then my arms, particularly my forearms, would break out, and I'm sure that there was a lot of shedding that I picked up, and shedding is a thing. But I have a friend here who's adamant that actually I just refuse to hold fear through this whole thing. And he has held that position. I will not fear the virus. I will not fear the jab. I will not fear what they're doing to us. I will not fear the future. And it's extraordinary. He had his blood read the other day. And what's really interesting is he is jabbed. And the person reading the blood did not know this. They did not know he was jabbed. And he's reading lots of people's blood, jabbed and unjabbed in New Zealand. They're all showing, for example, distorted cells. The red blood cells are denuded. There is evidence of graphene, this weird graphene in there, and these little structures. And when you really go in under the microscope, it's disconcerting. And he looked at my friend's blood and he said, "I have blood envy." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "This is the most beautiful blood I have ever seen, and I can barely find a trace of graphene." Now, this man is jabbed. Doesn't that do one's head in? Because, and I want to talk about this, Jack, in the future with you, the dance of our beliefs and the manifestations of the worlds that we can create from those beliefs versus being told what we are to believe from the outside in. The ideology and the programming, how powerful are we as beings in being able to create worlds that are away from this one world that we are offered through the media and the societal structure and programming?
So I'd say it's 50-50. We are both the canvas and the painter. So when you see something in the environment, it impresses so much on you. And a lot of people are very blind to this. When you watch specific things and narratives being unfolded in real time, they impress incredible effects onto your psyche. A lot of people don't know this, and a lot of people feel like they're immune to this, by the way, which is not true. It's not true. And that is a scientific fact, right? It's not Jack's or Liz's subjective opinion that your environment affects you. It is a scientific fact that your environment affects you, but also you can impress things upon the environment, and you can impress your thoughts and your beliefs on the environment. So it's always this, like you said, it's like this careful dance between what the collective offers you and what you offer to the collective. So if the collective offers you dissonance and fear and so on and so forth, and you offer to the collective, well, I am unafraid of what you're offering me, good sir, that creates like this sort of, like I said, like this dissonant space where either the collective reality has to go, the collective timeline has to go, or your reality has to go. But the secret of all of this is that we live in a paradoxical mirror world. That means the world must, because of its rule set, because of its laws, and these are occult laws, because of its rule set, it must find a way to facilitate the existence of both. So it must find a way to facilitate the existence of whatever the collective is offering to you, the collective mind, the collective egregore of the whole species of humanity. And it must facilitate, no matter how small or little or how isolated, your own belief system. That's what we call an auric field, right? So what happens when these two forces meet? And these forces meet. This is why I tell people, build your spaceship, make your home a beautiful place, because the moment you leave that door, the moment like that symbolic journey or switch up happens, when you go through the archway of your house and out into the world, you are now, enthralled by the collective reality. But when you are in your temple, the temple of your body and largely the temple of your home and your house, the reality has to bend to your will. It has to. That's how it's structured. So for reality, any point or any scale of a thing is at its most basic core calculated as one, as singular. It's like one thing. So your belief system carries the exact same weight as the belief system of humanity as a whole. And both of those things will need to be facilitated. That's the beauty and the incredible enigma of our world.
Ah, this is fascinating. I want to refer to your writing about the home. You did allude to it earlier, but you actually wrote on your wonderful thread, Jack of Faces, that's at Jack of Faces, the greatest spell you can cast is to make your home the most beautiful place you can, clean, pure, and a shelter tent in which your energy can thrive. Take your heart and put it in a box. I actually love that. And I think for today, I would like to do this over a series of nights if you're all right. Are you okay at the same time tomorrow night to continue?
I would be honored. Absolutely. I think we vibe very well. And I'll tell you what, we might even have differing opinions and perspectives on a plethora of topics. And I would love to, in a civil and diplomatic and in the utmost respectful way, I would love to discuss those over, like, with you. You have a wonderful presence, and your energy is just right. I would love to. I would be honored.
I would love to get back to a world. Isn't it exciting when you can talk in a civilized way and have completely differing opinions, and there is not one skerrick of desire to put the other person down because you differ from me, but rather how intriguing. I had not thought about it like that. You've just enriched me with your view. I don't agree with it, but I'm going to sit with it and see if it shifts my perspective a bit. And if I decide that I don't agree with it, I will, above all else, this is what I've said through the last 5 years, the whole definition of freedom is that I may see that you hold a totally opposing view to me, and I am willing to die on a hill for you to be able to hold that view. But I will never be rude to you because you hold a different view from me. I will never put you down for that. That is not freedom. That's a prison.
That's beautiful. I completely agree. And, like, I admire and appreciate people such as yourself, especially those who I, let's say, tend to disagree with on certain topics. And I'll tell you why. Because it takes a certain level of, you have to be sort of like a gutsy person to not make it about winning the argument, but to make it about deciphering the truth. That is the divine principle of spiritual evolution. And when I meet a person who is open to discussion and debate, to, sort of like, so we can question reality together and see what truths we can unveil, that is a beautiful thing. Even if we disagree, most of my friends and kindred spirits, I would say, are people who I largely disagree with, but I love them so much. I have so much respect for them because I know that they're also on their path to uncover the truth, whatever that truth is, even if it goes against everything they believe, right? It's beautiful.
Absolutely. And that's why it was Jacinda Ardern who launched the whole nonsense of misinformation and disinformation in the hall at the United Nations. And she's gone on to Harvard, that very broken now seat of learning. It's been so denuded of its integrity and its honor. And she sits there and spouts this far left Marxist nonsense. There is no such thing as mis or disinformation. It can never be, because that's me saying I am the arbiter of the one truth. And she told that to the nation. I am your single source of truth. That woke a lot of people up. But it's just a laughable concept. I mean, it is a laughable idea. The best is that we edge towards an agreement on ideas, but through the richness of vastly contrasting ideas and differences, always at all times treated with respect and dignity. You used that beautiful phrase, in a lovely, respectful, dignified way. To be able to discuss our differences is so exciting to me. That's where life becomes alive with colour. I want to put this. This is a very wonderful post you put up. It's not. I haven't got the date here. I've spent the last 5 years, you write, completely unemployed and devoid of, inverted commas, business. From dusk to dawn, I have relished in the freedom and meditation time provided by each and every second of my life. My being has been reprogrammed and renewed by this luxury of time and the ability to choose how I spend each waking moment. To me, this is what defines wealth, the ability to do as you will, when you will. Even the moneyest of men, I love that word, have no access to this luxury because they spend most of their day maintaining their money. Money and things require maintenance, and maintenance requires mental energy, time, and worry. Yet here I am, well-fed, well-clothed, building spaceships, always provided for, always safe, always grateful. How does one do it? By not doing it at all. Stop trying, and what is yours will make its way to you. Make space for the mystical to occur. Most men aren't truly wealthy. They're just rich. That's an extraordinary post. And that's not presupposed, that's not based on an idea that you are some child of a vast inheritance who can sit there and twiddle your thumbs all day. You're not talking about that, are you? You weren't given a vast amount of money, so you're living in beautiful luxury somewhere and being able to write that. You have yourself, as you've discussed here, come from poverty. You know, you've been impoverished, and yet there, to me, when I read that, I've always wondered what is real richness in life, and it was a recognition for me that that's when you're wealthy. Where did that come from?
That post came from a source I'm not proud of because there are many sort of like these micro factions that you would see on social media, and let's say X. And again, like I'm a smaller page, whatever. I do have like my regular followers, so on and so forth. But I got into this little bit of an argument that I immediately regretted. So there's let's say another group of people with different beliefs about certain like esoteric truths or occult truths or so on and so forth. And I got into a little bit of an argument with those people, and I had to sort of like wake myself back up. This is not my mission. This is not why I'm here. I'm not here to argue with people. I'm just here to educate, in the sense to like interpret the truth and put it out there. So, in like during this argument, I found myself in a position where I was like, it's an incredible amount of negativity, and let's say there's an incredible amount of sort of like hatred and negativity coming my way. And one of the primary points, and this is what I find a little bit infantile when it comes to the Western world and how men in the Western world view power and influence, is one of the key aspects of the argument was like, well, they kept telling me, you're broke, you're broke, you're broke. And well, like in a factual sense, I wouldn't even say that I'm broke, but it's so important for me for people to understand that material things like this isn't just said because it's like just the pretty thing to say, right? The pursuit of material wealth is what has single-handedly deteriorated your societies. It is single-handedly the thing that has made you so selfish and greedy that for the sake of maintaining that wealth and whatever little petty influence it might bring, right? You are willing to reject the other, to discard the other, to offend them, and so on and so forth. So when I posted that not in the like I wasn't feeling beauty at that moment. I was just feeling like, I wish I could convey this in a way, and I hope I find the inner strength to not offend anyone or be brutal towards anyone or be hurtful towards anyone, because I would have gone against my mission, right? And again, this is where I have a long tongue sometimes, and this is where it gets me because there are some people that I felt inclined to call out. I feel like there are some people who are not positive players. I think there are some people, let's say even in the conservative space or the right wing space, that are not there to cause positive change. I feel like they're there to cause separation and the sort of like to incentivize disgraceful behavior, even towards women,
Absolutely.
right? Which I absolutely don't agree with. Just because we come from, let's say, a traditionalist or conservative background, it is the conservatist traditionalist background that takes the idol of the woman and worships it. It is not this side that demands worship from the female, and it is not the side that demands submission from the woman. It is the side that celebrates the incredible intuitive tradition and the intuitive sense that the female gender has. It is actually the side that has to celebrate this. So, yeah, without going too much into it, like, I think it's very important for the Western man to find his self-respect and then to find his strength and to find his footing. This is coming from someone who is a spiritual brother. I have no stakes in this fight. I really don't. I could just sit at my home and be like, oh, okay, you do your thing, man. But it's so, I don't know. Like, I feel very bad for women in particular in the West, because in the West, I feel like the average woman, the virtuous woman, gets rewarded nothing by society. Like, the woman that gets rewarded in Western society today is the absolute utter sexual deviant. And that is the woman that is sort of like gains everything. And the woman who is virtuous and kind and gentle and intuitive and caring and thoughtful and intellectual, that woman is sort of like put down. And the woman who is a fighter and has this sort of like sense of justice, like real justice, not social justice, right? That woman is put down. Where I believe if in a perfect world, these are the women who would be in higher positions of power and influence, right? Not the ones who are preaching sexual deviance and not the ones who are preaching. And I'm very open-minded about sexuality as well. It's not like I'm sitting here and saying, well, women have to be a certain way. No, they don't. Like, it's just all sorts of messed up. And this is the kind of strange gender confusion state that both males and females are in the West right now. Like, I feel like men have struggled immensely to find their masculinity and to finally understand, like, some things just won't go. And sometimes being a man is about sacrifice. And sometimes being a man is about becoming willing to put yourself into that arena and fight for what's right and fight for what's just and so on and so forth. To not break things down and destroy them per se, but to create new system, to architect change, to be that moving force, right? So when I criticize these men, I criticize them for their inability to even engage in meaningful conversation, to even engage in civil discussion about, hey, like, what are some things that we can fix? What are some things that we can address in our society that are not working in a way that should be working? And the only reason, and the primary reason, and we can blame females all we want, but the primary reason why a certain portions of society is breaking down is because you don't have enough of a backbone to enforce divine truth and to enforce gentleness and kindness and so on and so forth, right? Okay, I can keep going. It's a big rant.
It's fantastic. And, I personally experienced it being with somebody for a few years there who ended up with working for the son, one of the sons of Rupert Murdoch, of all things, this greedy, broken old man who I met once, and it's not an inspiring energy, I can tell you. The son seemed okay for a while there, but it was all about sycophancy, and it was all about people being drawn because of his money. And the person that I knew totally got sucked into that world. And I, at the same time, ironically, was going the absolutely diametrically opposite way. I was investigating what had shaped me and why I reacted in the ways that I did to certain things, and what it is to be a being, what it is to come on this earth for this short earthly journey, and the bigger questions of how can I grow and develop as a being beyond the limitations that I currently have, which is a very humbling part of that journey, and inviting him all the way to come with me on that. Look, let's learn and grow. No, don't go over there with the money side of it, because it's just empty. And to the point where he was willing to abandon, and I don't want to go into too much personal detail, but the most beautiful part of one's life as a male or a female is the creation of a new life. And perhaps I will leave that there for discretion purposes. But it was so heartbreaking to see the choices, and yet I knew, as ignorant as I was, and as much as I was willing to learn and open-minded, I knew that I had a lot yet to learn. But I always said, we can't take any of this with us. The money will not bring happiness. I just know it. What will bring happiness is getting beyond our respective limitations and growing into something, and then using whatever money that you make for the creation of a better world. I mean, we were just very quickly, actually, we were universes apart, if you can imagine that. We were speaking different languages. It must have sounded like I was speaking Swahili to him, really, after a while, because he was in this world where it was all about the thrust and the lust for money, and it's so seductive, and it just becomes a black hole. And I mean black, because I think while there can be great things that come from money when it's in a way where it's done with awareness, where it becomes the master, which is what you're writing about, where you miss the moment to moment, where you miss your life, where you miss the most important beings that you may never know now because of this thrust for more materialism, more money. I think that's just a tragic life. And I know even the Rupert Murdochs, I suspect, on his deathbed will go, oh, I missed the real thing that life was about. I thought it was just about chasing more and more money, or the head of BlackRock, or any of them. There's a much deeper discussion. I'd like to take that further, because I think that you're right about the women who are the more sensitive ones are not. It's a very harsh world at the moment now, and yet we need that female nurturing influence in order to help create a better world. And we need this beautiful, strong warrior man with a sensitivity and an openness to ideas to create a better world. And this is what you wrote as a follow-up. You don't need to seek what's already abundant and available, my friend. You said to this person, I didn't see it was an argument. I just saw that you're close. You said, that's the catch. The more you make money a priority, the more you'll have to work for it to get it. Now, I saw that. I saw that happen. To this person. Not saying that you won't be able to get it, you will, but money doesn't come for free. I really want you all to understand this, you write. You exchange money for things, yes, but you exchange your time and your life energy for money too, if you go on a quest to, inverted commas, make it. It is exactly the work people do for money that makes them prideful and later on paranoid and ignorant about losing everything they've worked for. They've put in so much effort, energy, and life force into creating their wealth that they're terrified of losing it. Their identity becomes the persona that was created by the money they've earned. So keeping and upkeeping their wealth becomes more important than using it. You always have money. There's always money coming to find you. Whatever you wish to do, you will have the money to do. For that, you will have the money for that, if you can just stop pursuing it as a means to an end. Your bank account will say zero at the end of every month, but every time you truly need or want something, just enough will find its way to you to make it happen. And do you know, the last 5 years of doing this volunteer work, using my skills in law and then my skills years ago in mainstream media, I thought I'll use it to find the truths that are being hidden in this propagandized, bullied, lied to New Zealand. I've experienced real poverty. But what you write there is absolutely true. There was never a lot, but there was always just enough for us to get by. It's
No,
extraordinary what you write
the
there.
illusion. There's, and I find that I think you would agree because of what you just said and the experiences that you had. The experience with money to a spiritual person is like the experience of rain. Like whenever you're thirsty, right, the rain will come. There's no reason to pursue to run after the clouds. Like, oh, they do a rain dance. There's no need to do a rain dance. And I feel like when we talk about these things and how I related it, these from, like, let's say a behavioral, like from a psychological sense, is for the Western male, money has become this the only means through which they can provide containment and literally material and physical shelter for women. And it's a very sexualized space. And even though like sort of like sex is all over the sort of like the Western collective mind, it's still a very taboo subject. So when a male becomes emasculated to a degree, like on an average scale, not everyone, of course, there are quite masculine individuals from the West, of course, but on a massive scale, when a male becomes so emasculated that they are unable, on average, to provide emotional shelter to a woman, to their women, what happens is that then those women will go and seek out foreign men who are high in uh, disagreeableness, aggression, men who are quite literally will force their agendas onto them to feel some sort of, well, containment. And containment as a spiritual, how to say, idea and sentiment is very important for the female energy. So when a female is unable to find that containment where they are locally, they rage against the male population. And this is what we're seeing in the West. We're seeing the woman sort of like this. It's a plea for help of like, please be responsible, because a woman who is emotionally contained and sheltered by a strong, virtuous, spiritual man is not a sexually deviant woman, because she doesn't need to be. She can thrive in her energy. But what we're seeing right now is the Western male has become so emasculated. He has become so stuck up in his ways and so far removed from the arena and the battlefield, right? They think these things that are supposed to make him into a force of nature. That now the only means with which they can have any sense of control over a woman's interest or attraction or so on or whatever is through, well, money and financial means. And this is exactly what the big corporal mind wants, right? If you worship my money, you worship my gods. And whoever's face I print on that dollar bill, you're gonna eat it up. That's what I think.
There is so much more to that. Could we begin tomorrow night with talking more about that? I think that's where we will pick it up again, because the relationship you talk about there, and this man's gone on to this one, is with an equally transactional female who is equally materialistic, who is
Oh my.
equally pursuing, the empty money and the big sports car and all of the things that they're not necessarily bad, but if as you said before, they become your God, if they become the thing you worship and get excited about, to the cost of connecting with the soul journey. I'll finish it here. When I met Murdoch, I thought, gosh, on his deathbed, he's going to have a terrible moment where he will go, all those millions, all those deals, all those people I screwed over, all that mistrust and that bitterness that was in his face. It was a very bitter face. Will all hit him in a moment as he crosses over. And And in that moment, a world will explode of a world of regret, actually. So, so the other thing I knew in that moment when I was thinking into that was, I wonder if some men like that are so afraid of death that they think they can ward off death with just that one more deal or that extra 100 million in my bank account.
Well, I
And they
will
think,
tell you that yes. I will tell you that yes. This is why it deals with different types of, paralogical things and beings are made. And we can get into that too. But the idea is of the deathbed is like when you sort of like step into that twilight age. I feel most of the quotes from men who are on their deathbed, who have spent most of their life toiling and working at God knows what, like they don't even know what, some sort of competitive advantage. They almost always say, I believe, that like something like incredibly simple and profound, where they'll say, "I wish I had seen more sunsets." That's it. Like that encompasses the how you have trivialized the very Garden of Eden that you were born into, and you have completely sidetracked the meaning and the function of this world, which is to experience spiritual bliss and to blossom into a greater soul, a greater mind, a greater spirit. And you have sort of like entrapped yourself in this stupid senseless system of like, oh, well, I have to compete, I have to find influence, I have to survive. What is the point of survival, right? Like, we have a saying here in Georgia. I might botch this because I'm translating it live now in my head, but
say it
it
in Georgian
goes
first. Say it in your own language. I want to hear your language.
it goes like it means an honorable death is better than a wasted life.
Oh,
I think that is where the Western man has lost the plot. You know, like the list of priorities are put on their head, right? So now it becomes all about, oh, my country first, my town first, my village first, my this first. It doesn't matter, my friend. Like, we all can have a beautiful home. There's no reason why you can't have one, and there's probably no reason why I can't have one, except for your incessant fear of what might come because you're afraid of what discomfort and pain and so on and so forth. So when we have this conversation, I always go back to that. I always go back to the Western female, the Western woman, even though it has like the Western woman has been targeted so brutally in almost like a ritualistic sense where you go for the woman, you go for the feminine energy, because when the feminine energy is imbalanced in a society, it sort of like starts reeling, and it sort of starts thinking in like survivalist terms. But I think it's exactly the Western woman who delivers this cultural crisis, right, that the Western world is in, because the Western man is incapable of doing it without them, right? It's the woman who must say, you know what, this is what I value in a man, and that is if the man is virtuous and generous and kind, and he's not deceptive, and he's strong, but he's not like a killer or a murderer, or he's not willing to like morally disgrace himself for some sort of advantage over others. So when that movement starts, I will be following that movement. That's going to be a beautiful movement, and I hope it begins soon. I hope it turns. I hope it turns soon. I really do.
Jack, you are only in your 30s. It's
Come on.
extraordinary. No, truly, it is such in 5 years in which I have had many times when I have been in despair. You know, why am I giving all this? Why am I caring this much? Why am I bringing my heart and my soul to try to help this fallen world, and it's just so brutal. This sort of conversation. I will go to sleep tonight with a sense of the deepest soul food, and I hope others do when they listen to this. And I am so deeply honored to talk to you, and thank you for speaking with me. And let's talk again tomorrow. What a treat.
Let's do it, Liz. I appreciate you so much, and you wear your heart on your sleeve. I love when people sort of like can do that. I'm a little bit envious because I can't do that as much, right?
You do.
I'm so appreciative, so grateful. Let's have another great conversation, and much love to you. Let's talk again soon.